this is going to be the best bit of the game,
Yeah.
because after that we're probably going to get absolutely pumped. But this one, we dished out the pumping.
I wasn't contemplating anything other than a Celtic victory in this game, and that's very unusual.
I have seen teams exactly of that level batter us. Celtic get through their most difficult game of the season, and there's a small matter of the Champions League. That's on this week's episode of 20 Minute Tims. I'm joined by Melly.
Yes.
Stephen.
What's happening?
And I'm Jamie. An awful lot's happening. There was some right good football to watch this week, and if I asked you last week, which game do you think is going to see the best football in terms of the opponent, Champions League or Viaplay Cup? I don't think anybody would have said Falkirk, Stephen.
No, John McGlynn's Falkirk as they give them their full name, and as you've said in the intro, the most difficult challenge of the season. I'd love to hear the argument against that, because that'll ruffle a few feathers probably, saying that Falkirk are the best team that Celtic have played all season, certainly at home anyway. And to be perfectly frank, that's exactly what they were.
Was Brendan being honest? Was it a Brendan grenade? Was it both?
I think he's been honest. I think at the game, the first game this season that I felt Celtic might lose this, and we haven't really had that at all this season. First time we've been down twice in a game, and it was just refreshing. I was thinking at half time, do you know what? See if Falkirk do come away with the victory here, it will be gutting for us. We're out the cup and all that, and we didn't want that, but at least it would then give everybody else a sort of blueprint to go by. Like, here, see when you go places like Celtic Park, try and play football, stick to your style, have a style of play, and then go for it. Your fans will come along, and then you might have a chance of victory. We've seen how many clubs have we seen over the years come to Celtic Park, park the bus, there's none of their fans in the stadium, and they come out with the same scoreline, or probably worse off than Falkirk were. So Falkirk came, immense pride, better than any team I've seen in the top league, better than Bratislava this season, and it was just like, why can more teams not do that, man?
It might seem slightly patronising of us to say, oh, you gave it a right good go, well done, pinch their cheeks and say,
That's genuine, man.
yeah, you took your 5-2 defeat like a champ, right?
well,
It might seem patronising, but I mean, secondary to us being a Celtic podcast hosted by Celtic fans, we kind of want to see Scottish football do as best as it possibly can. It's not got that much going for it, but if you've got teams who actually want to play football, then it's good for the entire sport in this country, and it's very rare that we see that at Celtic Park. And again, the argument against that will be, but they still get gubbed. But they actually tried, they impressed their fans, and as you say, Melly, they actually turned up and they were quite proud of what they saw. So the result was still the same, but we are sitting here talking about Falkirk, not in like a sneering way about how they parked the bus and how only one team was interested in playing football. Falkirk made it very, very difficult for Celtic on the day in a number of ways. And when it was 2-1, I was thinking, right, there's no excuses here, because Brendan Rodgers has been explicit in his desire to win the treble this season. He spoke about that. He said that was the one that got away from them last season. It was a poor start to last season, so we need to go and get that one back. So there can't be any stuff about how it's all about the league in Europe for us. We need to just concentrate on that. That was a big game, and Falkirk turned up and made it into a real contest.
So I was thinking about this when everyone was giving the plaudits to Falkirk for the way they played. I thought to myself, but why is it good? You know, everyone's like, oh, it's great to see that, but I mean, at the end of the day, they lost the game.
Yeah.
They ended up getting battered 5-2, and I'm not sure that was in anyone's sort of idea when they turned up. We'll play this way, but we might lose 5-2. But the flip side to that is, you're playing Celtic at Celtic Park, you're probably going to lose anyway.
Oh, yeah.
So there are things you can gain out with the respect of the Celtic fans, which I'm sure isn't worth an awful lot to John McGlynn and the Falkirk fans, to be honest. But if your manager goes there with a game plan, and you play well and you get plaudits from the Celtic manager and the football and press after it, I suppose as a player you can say, well, actually maybe I've got a bit more buy-in on what the manager's ideas are. You prove yourself as a player. There was a couple of players there in the Falkirk side who can say that they did reasonably well or even won their duels. All they can do is win their individual battles on the pitch, and the fact Celtic had to ring the changes showed these individual players anyway, you did a really good job against Celtic's left back. I thought Hatate had a terrible game, partly because the Falkirk players were right on top of him. They were stealing the ball off him. VALLE had a terrible game. I think there's things that the Falkirk players can take away from the way they approach the game, other than just like meaningless plaudits from Celtic fans. And I think from other teams' point of views, I remember when I was a wee guy, I used to watch the football. My dad, he'd always get frustrated at the opposition. He'd be like, see if they just took the game to Celtic, and we'd be watching it going, there was a pass on there and he didn't play it. He's no got the courage, he's not got enough belief to play that pass. He should have played that. They should have played this, sort of gene on the opposition. And I always just think, well, it's pointless. They're going to get beat anyway. But when you see an opposition team turn up and play like that, you think, if they can play like that against Celtic, that much give them enormous belief to keep going for the rest of the season in their own division.
Yeah, we seen it a couple of seasons ago. Remember, we were on here after a winter break and we would come up against Aberdeen, who were flying at the time under Jim Goodwin.
That's right.
Went to Pataudry.
Yeah.
They went on that big winning run, and then he just decided, see all that stuff we've been doing, can that, and we're just going to sit in here. And what, did they not have a shot on target or something like that?
Right.
Celtic ended up winning 1-0, but you can see after that they went on that terrible run, and Falkirk came to Celtic Park with a belief, with a game plan, stuck to it and got rewards for it. Whereas how many times do we see teams coming to Celtic Park looking about, Stephen's favourite, left back's the smallest in the pitch, go and put a big guy over there. I didn't see Falkirk launching the ball aimlessly down the line and hoping to work off scraps. They played the ball out. They went with their game plan. When they lost the ball and Celtic had it, they became compact, but you could see they knew what they were doing. And when they broke, crucially, and when they went at Celtic, they got numbers forward and they had a plan. It didn't just look like all we've been working on in training is staying in shape, not letting them get the shot. It looked like when they broke on Celtic, they knew what they're doing, because there was passages of play where they worked up the park, and both their goals come from coming out, getting out in the wide areas. The first one, it was a bit of a long ball forward, but it was into an area that's dangerous. It wasn't out to the right to the byline. I think Falkirk looked like they came with a plan, but they had a plan for when their plan was working as well, and no teams come like that, and that was why it was refreshing. A team came, try to play football, got the rewards, but ultimately were beaten by a team with better players. That's what it's all about. It's the same as Celtic going into Europe. They're going to come up against a team with better players, but are they better just sitting in and us looking at that and going, is that the best we can offer? Or do they just go, we're playing well now, let's continue that and see where it gets you? What are you going to get more belief from?
I was talking, we did a match, what do we call it when we rate the players? The end of season report card.
Oh, yeah.
Where we rate all the players, and we did that towards the end of last season, and a name that came up was NICOLAS, and I wasn't very impressed by NICOLAS last season. And I think there's a couple of apologies coming in this episode of the podcast for players, but I just sort of I was of the opinion that, you know, if he was on loan, I probably wouldn't want to keep him, just because he never seemed to impress himself on the game. But that being said, he did pre-season with Celtic, and in this season he's been absolutely on fire, and there's no denying the guy's contribution in that game, Stephen.
It's made a big difference, isn't it? I think Brendan Rodgers acknowledged that after the game. He said the big thing was pre-season and being able to kind of shake off the niggling things that were following him around last season. He said
Couldn't say that as well after the game.
Yeah, did they? Right. Okay. I didn't catch that, but I'm not surprised by that. I think all the stuff that we've always spoken about as well was acknowledged, the likes of his dental surgery that he had and losing weight. So I'm not going to drag us back into that. But suffice to say now, it seems to be all completely behind him, and he's hit some serious form this season. He's gone from being a guy who some of us maybe wouldn't have necessarily cared if he'd gone in the in the summer
that was
window.
my opinion of him, but look now, I was wrong.
Yeah, that's how very brave
massive
of you.
Isn't it? Absolutely massive.
I'm so impressed.
My heart of gold award is in the post.
That's what it's all about, being a football fan, really.
Magnanimous.
Yeah, I don't really have any time for people who just dig in with whatever opinions they've held from the very start.
Part of being a football fan is you develop an opinion on a player, and you have to make it your entire personality. Yeah, and you can't ever change it.
Cannot waver for it from either a second. So that's just not the case here. I don't really have any time for that. Of course, you can have preferences. For example, we've spoken about Scales or Taylor, whoever in the past. You can say that this guy's doing really well, but going forward, I would prefer this type of player. The Starfelt thing was always that he's a good penalty box defender, but can we get someone who's better on the ball? You can have all these opinions; they're all very valid. But if you just stick to, he's crap, absolute bomb scare after like even good performances, I don't really get any time for anything like that. But I was completely wrong about KUHN as well. Not that I ever said that he was terrible. I was just unimpressed in his first half a season after signing in January, and he's gone from that to being absolutely outstanding so far. He's tearing teams apart, and long may it continue, because we were desperate for a winger in this. Well, some of us, we all agreed that we desperately needed a winger, because we got a lot of players in there who have varying degrees of success, and sometimes they're kind of hot and cold. KUHN was another one who kind of slotted in with that, who you think, right, well, there's another option there, but he's in the kind of that sort of grey blob we've got at wing, where it's Dyson Maeda and someone else. James Forrest obviously did very well last season as well, but we need someone else in there. KUHN has just put his hand up and saying, no, that's me. So he's been a revelation this season, and getting goals as well. Several goals so far. come on, what did we get? Like 2 goals and 2 assists in half an hour
yeah.
against Falkirk. I know it's only Falkirk, but ultimately that's like Celtic's.
Oh,
yeah.
only Falkirk.
After all that big, he's done really well.
I'm portraying the viewer here, saying I couldn't make it stick there. But if that's the argument that it's only Falkirk, despite the fact they made it very difficult for Celtic on the day, then he's done it basically all season. He's been contributing massively. So yeah, I'm really impressed. It's a very good start to the season. He seems to be linking up very well with other players around him. Seems to be taking shots a lot more. That was another common complaint we had him, being
holding on to it too
a
long.
wee bit more ruthless in front of goal, and we're definitely seeing that. So yeah, what a revelation he's been.
Yeah, he seems to be getting better week on week, and I think with the last season how things panned out, we thought he needs to come in January and be good, and we had him scouted. Alex said he might go on to be one of the best wingers at the club, and you thought, right, okay, maybe.
What does that actually mean in the grand scheme of things?
And now we're starting to see that. Well, we've seen on the other side, Daizen Maeda will always play, and he offers you what he offers you, and we can't really get that anywhere else. But I've always said on the other side, we need somebody being creative, because that's not really Daizen Maeda's game, and KUHN's brought that this season, and as Stephen said, he's adding the goals. I think if we'd have got to this summer, after last season, and we hadn't brought in a winger and KUHN wasn't playing well, we could have struggled and said we should have got a winger in the summer. But with Kyogo not really banging them in despite playing well this season, we haven't really noticed that, because we're getting goals from elsewhere, and KUHN's the main man in there, and he's slowly but surely looking like player of the year potential.
I'm glad we're starting to see the pace everyone was talking about.
Yeah.
I know, it was unbelievable.
So direct as well. It just picks the ball up and drives at defences. Not a lot of defences know what to do with that in terms of domestic opposition, at least. So it could cause teams real problems. It'll be good to see how he develops in this Champions League set of fixtures we've got as well, because he's a guy he came to the club with real pedigree. We kind of joked about it.
A good CV.
Yeah, definitely been through the books of Bayern Munich and Ajax, I think was the other one. But he'd maybe lost his way a little bit before turning up at Celtic. So I'm really keen to see what he's got this season. Let him loose on Rangers as well a few times. So he's been a real revelation, and what a turnaround it's been, because, as I say, I wasn't particularly impressed last season. I was kind of thinking, right, we're just sort of adding players. We're doing that thing again where we're just collecting players who'd never really contribute an awful lot. But what a complete turnaround it's been.
We've got another player on the other side in Palma who just has never looked like a quality product for Celtic, and honestly, I think he's starting to get worse. I don't get it. I don't get it with Palma. He looks to me like a player who's arrived at Celtic, really fancied this move, big club, Champions League, really tried, then no really hit the heights, probably because of his own ability or whatever. And then he sort of fell out a level. He looks as if his performance is getting worse. He doesn't look like a player that's striving to get back in the side. He's just out there vibing with things. And I thought he was pretty bad against Falkirk. And the more I look at it, I just don't really see any future for Palma at Celtic, which is disappointing, because he did score goals when he first arrived. He had a really good flurry of goals when he first arrived, and he's just no replicating even that form from before, which wasn't good enough.
No, well, that's right. And you said there that he seems to be getting worse. I think that's demonstrably the case, because you look at what he contributed last season, and it was good. I mean, there's always been question marks over Lewis Palma and whether he fits this team or whether he really fits any Celtic team of the last few years. And that was always kind of hanging over him. But what he did last season was he came in, and in his first 15 or 16 appearances, he was getting a goal every other game, and that included ones in the Champions League. And what I really liked about Palma at first was that, yes, he does have this slightly kind of a misfit feel to him. He doesn't really fit in anywhere necessarily, and that you would want to play him in every single game. But I think that's fine, because what he did have was he carried such a threat. I remember thinking at the time...
Did you not back up my score against Rangers?
I thought one of my bold predictions last season was he was going to score directly from a corner against Rangers and then dance provocatively in Michael Beale's face. It never came true.
We always over-egg the bold predictions a little bit, don't we? They're bold after all.
I did want that to happen, but what I liked about him at first was that every time he got the ball, not in the same way as Jota was, right, but I felt like something was going to happen, because he carried this threat from distance. He was such a good striker of the ball, and he was scoring goals. It looked as if he could ping them in from distance, which he did a couple of times, but that's completely gone. We don't see that at all now. And if that goes, if he's not carrying a goal threat, it's very difficult to justify his position in the team, because that's the only argument I would put forward for him even being included at all, is that he's got a goal threat. He's very good in front of goal, and that's what showed up in the scouting we had done on him from Alex of The Athletic, who we hire for these positions. And he said that he does have things he has to work on, but he's very good in front of goal. He's a good finisher. That's all completely gone, and what you're left with is the look of a guy who has learned to play football off YouTube or something like that. Do you know what I mean by that? It's like he watches these skills tutorials where he can do like flicks and tricks and all that, but he can't really apply it to anything. So he's a confusing player, and that was a woeful performance from him. And I know that he hasn't been consistently playing, so you can't expect necessarily players to hit the ground running all the time when they come in. But see, if the reality of being at a club like Celtic is that you will have players who are peripheral figures at times, and what is expected of you is to be able to come in and cover the guys who are ahead of you. If you can't do that in a game against, with all respect that we've already given them, Falkirk, they are still a lower league opposition. If you can't do that in a game like that, I fail to see where you really fit into the squad.
What do you make of the Lewis Palma fall off?
I think he's just going to fall out of the squad. I think where Celtic were last season, they came in and you could see something with him, but it was other aspect of his games where you thought, do you know, if Brendan Rodgers can work on this stuff, like off the ball stuff, his positioning and all that, we might have a player here. But it just looked like it might be too much to what he has to work on, and I think that's where we've got to now. Over the season, he fell away, and the players that were already there took over him. James Forrest dies in Maeda, and now we're looking at it. KUHN's came in, so he's fallen behind him. After the weekend, I'd probably put Yang ahead of him as well now, and I'm just looking at what he would bring is sort of outweighed by what he doesn't bring.
There's not like an unpredictable, like Yang brings that unpredictability, and if you want skills and tricks and no end product, you would rather a player on the, what you would imagine is on the up and Yang, do you know what I mean? You can maybe iron things out, whereas with Lewis Palma, you're just thinking to yourself, like, you've arrived here as an established footballer, you had a pretty decent record in Greece when you arrived, people were talking about all the goals and goal contributions you made. You arrived here, you looked okay, you've come out the picture a wee bit and you look like a player that, he kind of looks like a player that just needs to get out of the club now. Not in a harsh way, get rid of him, but just in a sort of Celtic themselves as well have improved, and you can't get by on that effort level and that ability level anymore. Yeah,
well, I find that with sometimes, because we've had some really, really great managers over the last 7-8 years. We've had Brendan Rodgers twice and Ange Postecoglou, and Neil Lennon did a good job at the time as well. But what we've come to expect is that these managers come in and do very, very well in their first season. But then the second season is more about improvement. And whether there's two ways to do that. You can improve by bringing in genuine quality, like we talk about all the time, and they look to have done that with Engels in particular. But players come in, or you can hope that the players come with you and improve with the level of the team. But sometimes they don't. Sometimes they're kind of left behind, and that's why you need to go out and sign players. And it's no hard feelings with Palma. It just seems like he's another one of those guys who, he was good for the task of last season, some of it anyway, the first half of the season, but now he's no longer, he's no longer suitable going forward. So we've had it. I mean, guys like David Turnbull, who were good for Celtic, Iwata was quite good, but the team moves on, and you either bring these players with you and hope that they can improve, or you just get rid of them and move on.
There is a bit of a sort of pitchy paint a bit of player, isn't there, though, when you look at, like, I mean, I sound like an old guy here, right? But you look at the way he dresses, you look how chronically online he is, then you look at the earring, and then you look at the way...
Go and get the inspirational quotes.
Aye, and then you look at the way that he approaches the game. It's all a bit showy, isn't it? It doesn't scream hard work and dedication. It screams, I want to pull clips for my Instagram, I want to be a social media guy, I'm a superstar back home. And the reason we're talking about these players side by side, him and KUHN, is because KUHN is a player who was, it's almost the flip side. Everyone was talking about Palma last year, and KUHN didn't look the best, but KUHN has used the pre-season opportunities to get better and, come up with the team, whereas Palma, he's been left behind, really.
It looks like we have moved beyond him now, and that doesn't always need to be a bad thing. Sometimes players just get left behind. He's looking like a sort of Cantwell replacement, as in we'd be laughing at him if he was doing the same thing, getting hooked after 60 minutes and not really contributing to the game, then going on his Instagram and talking about resilience and all that. But I think,
did he really post it? I thought it was a joke. I thought you posted. I thought you posted. I thought you made a joke about something he posted on Instagram. So you can't tell the difference. He's cooked now. If you can't tell the difference between a parody of what someone would put on Instagram and what they actually do put on Instagram, that's it. It's game over for him.
When you look at the Celtic wingers as well, when Maeda, we know what we're getting with him. Wingers, forwards, whatever you want to call it, the front three, they need to give you something at Celtic, but also there's that if they stop scoring or stop creating goals, you need to look at what they bring. And with KUHN and Maeda, KUHN, the second Adam Ida goal, he wins the ball back, he presses, wins the ball back, he's fast, he presses, the same as Diaz and Maeda. Maeda's just on another level, but when you take away goals from Palma, what do you get? And it's nothing. It's a guy looking to... There was one point he cut inside and he looked like he could have had a shot. He delayed and he just put his head down and then he takes the shot. Whereas, and I looked at Brendan Rodgers and he was furious. And you're looking at Brendan Rodgers getting annoyed at certain players like him, Welsh, and not doing what the rest of the players do. And he's like, I'm telling you what I expect of you. You're going out there, not delivering it, and then you're wanting to continue playing. It's not going to work out.
That's what I mean about being able to carry a bit of a misfit wild card at times, because you can't simply have another Dyson Maeda that will slot in and do that job. No. If you have to give him a rest occasionally, which we obviously have to do, it's going to have to be a different type of player, because...
He could have taken the Abada role, couldn't he? The guy that gets the goals but doesn't really contribute too much else.
Exactly, but we simply cannot have two Dyson Maedas. We can't have another one of those. You know why? Because the sport doesn't have two of those.
It doesn't exist.
No, so I do appreciate that it has to be a different type of player. You're not going to be able to replicate that. But then the question, as you say, it does become, what is it you are? If you can't do any of the Dyson Maeda, you can't bring any of those elements to the game, what are you actually bringing?
There you go. Last week we made the case of the defence last week, and people got hot under the collar in the YouTube comments. But I thought, you know what, we'll revisit the case for an entirely different defence this time. And long-term listeners will have heard me say just a couple of minutes ago. No, I mean stick with me now. Long-term listeners would have heard me say just a couple of minutes ago that you can't just pick a player, decide he's good and make it his whole personality, because they know that we used to not rate Greg Taylor, right? But short-term listeners will have heard that and went, oh, is that what you do with Greg Taylor, right? So Greg Taylor's out the side. We had back four of Baye, Stephen Welsh, Trusty and Raldog, and I don't think that's ever going to stick. And I thought overall, general speaking, I thought good introduction for VALLE. Struggled with the physicality of the game. I don't think he really knew what he was in for. Too easily bullied for the first goal. I felt it was a foul. Stephen, you didn't think it was a foul. The second goal, no foul at all. He just threw himself to the ground. Hopefully he'll learn now what Scottish football's like. I thought Trusty was okay, passable performance. I thought Stephen Welsh was bad, and I think Stephen Welsh is always bad. And as far as right back goes, Anthony Ralston was Anthony Ralston. Really, we kind of know what we're getting with him, Melly.
But he struggled with certain aspects of the game, but in certain aspects, I think he looked good. Looking offensively, he looks technically good, but he get caught a couple of times, and he's just going to learn from that, isn't it? It's a game against FALKIRK where it's not sort of hindered Celtic with the result. So going forward, there's a lot to work on with him, and it's looking like another one. I don't think he's going to be a disastrous signing. I think overall he could be a good player for Celtic, but it's a one we go, right, you've got a lot to learn. And when we look at Greg Taylor, and people have their criticisms of him, which is fine, but it's not easy just to go in there and be a left back. It's no easy just to go in and be a Celtic centre half, a winger. You have to work at it, and he will learn from it, and I think long term he'll be a decent player. But that first game wasn't the best, but there's a lot to work with.
Hopefully he's got out of his system.
Yeah, I said this last week about Greg Taylor's role. I'm not going to talk about Greg Taylor much this week because he didn't play.
He made a Horlicks of a clearance in the Champions League.
Thanks for that, Greg.
Cheers, Greg.
Immediately after we bummed him up last week for about 15 minutes, he goes
probably a lot of pressure for him to carry that 20-minute Tim's endorsement.
Slices one up in the air in the Champions League, which leads to a goal. Of course, that's not great. But I did say that last week about how it's not necessarily as simple as you're a left back, go out and do the same thing. There's a lot that Greg Taylor does in an average performance in a standard performance, not an average performance, in a good performance, that probably goes unnoticed. And that's why a lot of managers really rate him, because of his tactical versatility. I did notice that Baye got forward, and that's where Bernardo's goal came from, a very Greg Taylorish position, in that he was quite central, in a kind of inside left channel.
He was he headed it for
Bernardo.
Headed
it down for Bernardo to dish it straight into the net. One of those ones where it's right above the keeper, but by the time it's past it, by the time he's even reacted, it's already in the back of the net. But the defence, a couple of things to say about that. 2 debutants in there, and that added to the fact that overall it's a very unfamiliar lineup across the back four, 2 of which are making their debut. 1 hardly plays and always gets injured, and 1 is a very established player, but he's generally only ever used sparingly across a season. So there is that caveat, or those 2 caveats to apply to any performance. So we're not making lasting judgments here, but ultimately, if we were in the pub after the game, we would be talking about those players and how they did on the day. That's all we've got to go on so far, is how they performed on the day, and it wasn't spectacular. I wouldn't go say, no, this is a disaster, like another wasted transfer window. And no, I don't think that any of that applies at all. But I thought Trusty was okay. Absolutely fine. We disagreed when we watched it back. We disagreed on the nature of the foul in the build up to Falkirk's first goal. I think it did have a hand on him. He kind of put his hand on by his chest, but I didn't really see enough to be calling that back, to be honest. The one for the second goal, I kind of just goes down clutching his face. So I not the greatest of debuts, but again, there's going to be a lot of football to be played this season, and they'll have opportunities. Again, it's credit to Falkirk because they made it very difficult. There was times during at least the first half, when they got their second goal, it was Celtic couldn't get out of their defensive thirds. No. They were passing it around, and they were sticking to their game plan as well as Falkirk, where they weren't panicking and keeping the ball, but they couldn't really get out because Falkirk were just pressing and making it very difficult. So I apply all these caveats to the standard of the performance of the defence. It wasn't great at all, but Stephen Welsh, we've spoken about it so many times over the last few years that it's barely even worth talking about, but it was a day to forget for him. And to be honest, it's quite disappointing because he is, in effect, the senior defender in there. Probably should be the guy who's holding it together. He's been at the club for so long, and he's almost 25. Tony Ralston is a wee bit older than him, but you would think him as the kind of main centre half in there, he should be the one that's reliable. But he's
never been that.
No, and we were talking about that before we turned the mics on as well. Again, we sympathise with the fact that he never plays, so you just pitch him in there and expect, right, be an 8 out of 10, be Cameron Carter-Vickers for the day, and that's not always realistic. But what I said about Palma applies here. If you can't come in and just perform a functional role in a team for a 1-off or 2-off or whatever it is, it's very difficult to justify your position in the squad other than, well, he's been around for ages, may as well keep him.
I think that's why he's here. I don't want to be too harsh on the guy because we all like it when players come through and their Celtic players come through the youth ranks and all that sort of stuff, but better defenders than him have come and gone, and he just sort of sticks around. But that's enough of the negative stuff. Celtic scored 10 goals in 2 games, 5 of which were in the Viaplay Cup, the League Cup, 5 of which came in the Champions League kickoff. That was something else. That Champions League atmosphere was something else. I watched the highlights. The players' faces when that Champions League music kicks off, and not even the Celtic players' faces, the opposition faces, and the noise goes up. It was brilliant. And that thing that Celtic fans, this is my favourite thing that Celtic fans do now. They try and roar over the Champions League music like that. I don't know if that's conscious or subconscious in our minds. When the Champions League, the roar goes up because you want to drown the Champions League anthem out. Kasper Schmeichel, see the beamer that hit his face? Yeah. He was like, oh, brilliant. And that music, it's funny this because that music has begun to mean an awful lot to these players. It's not a meme like that. When that music hits, they see their faces change. They think, this is it. This is that. There's only. I'm not going to sit here and count up Champions League squads, right? But there's only a finite number of. There's only, I don't know, 1 or 2% of employed top level footballers actually in the Champions League right now. To get into that small group, to be standing on the line when you hear that music must be enormous for so many players, especially at Parkhead. It's such a special occasion, but Celtic absolutely rose to it.
The opposition, sorry to jump in there, but the opposition quite like it as well. I've noticed it's not like a fearful, like a welcome to hell atmosphere. See when the roar kicks in, when the theme comes on, you can see the players responding to it in surprise as well. But it's not a kind of, oh, what have we got ourselves into? It's more a kind of, all right, okay, this is interesting,
isn't it? It's like, oh, holy shit,
here we go.
This one kind of felt different because we were going
in a good way or a bad way.
In a good way. I remember the Man City one, and when you watch that back, when the odd clip comes up on Twitter, the start of that is incredible, the Champions League noise and as it's going through the players. And I think it's kind of similar to this game because I think those 2 games, Celtic and the fans as well, were going into it with genuine belief.
Yeah.
The Man City game, we were going up against Guardiola's team. They hadn't been beaten, but we weren't fearful of it. We'd had a great start under Brendan Rodgers. In this one, we went into the Champions League. We'd sorted out the summer. We'd got good players in. We've gone in and won every game this season, and we're looking at this game going, this is a genuine chance to go out there and do something. And it just felt like everybody was like, right, let's go and do this. And I think that's what the atmosphere is always brilliant, and the noise at that's always great. But a lot of the time you're going, this is going to be the best bit of the game because after that we're probably going to get absolutely pumped. But this one, we dished out the pumping, and Celtic came into this game in good form, started off decent, but then went up to another level in the second half. And it's one of those games you'll probably look back on in years to come and go, that was absolutely brilliant.
The preparation for this game, Stephen, I felt from Celtic's perspective really couldn't have been better in terms of what Melly says. Pre-season, great results in pre-season, especially in the pre-season tour. Good, strong recruitment, and a couple of players we're going to talk about. Good win and run up to the game. The preparation for the game looked good. The draw comes out, ideal draw. Everything was sort of leading up to a very, very strong pre-Champions League. Everything was going our way right up to this game. Yeah. And then the 90 minutes unusually went our way. I've seen people say, what about the level? What about the level of Bratislava? They're not that great. And I myself thought that for a while. I have had thoughts along the lines of, are they just like a first level Champions League qualifier team? The team you'd play first or second in the Champions League that you kind of expect to beat, except it had all the Champions League razzle dazzle and the music and the fans and all that. But I have talked myself down from that position numerous times by saying, yes, but even in the course of doing this podcast over the 9 or 10 years we've been doing it, I have seen teams exactly of that level batter us.
Yeah,
Cluj,
teams you expect to beat. I think you just said there.
Slavia Prague, Copenhagen, Mal. Like I could really just sit here all day naming teams that we should have pumped that have absolutely pumped us, isn't it?
Good, this isn't it? Even though we're just listing tiny minnows that have gubbed us in the Champions League.
Did Midtjylland beat us? Have they beat us?
They put us out.
Oh, there you go. See.
You
getting any of your own? No.
Cluj was a belter, but I think that was already covered, wasn't it? So, I appreciate that, but you're right. We can't take that for granted at all. We can go into any European game, we can't do that because of the recent history of Celtic in Europe. But that said, the preparation was excellent, and as we've mentioned previously, it doesn't matter because this team is in the Champions League proper. This is the format that everyone has decided upon, and this is the random nature of a draw, in that we're always going to play against pot 4 teams. So Slovan Bratislava just happened to be a lower level opposition to Celtic, but as you've said, we can't count on stuff like that, certainly going into the past. But Celtic's preparation was excellent for this game. Stretching back into last season, we've won every game since the draw at Ibrox, and when you consider that was supposed to be the tipping of the scales, that was the moral victory.
Oh, of course.
The moral victory that was supposed to derail Celtic. Celtic have won every single football game they've played ever since then, and it's up to you whether you want to include pre-season in that, but it doesn't matter because they won all of those anyway, so take them if you want. But
I liked Brendan's "That's us now" won back-to-back Champions League games if you're counting Feyenoord, and that's something else. I was like, okay, right, relax. Well, it's true.
Check the record.
Check the record.
No, it is, but there was I know what Melly's getting at. I know what you're saying about how it felt different, because I said this on our At The Match podcast, but I wasn't contemplating anything other than a Celtic victory in this game, and that's very unusual.
Do you think it'd be that comprehensive? But
no, I didn't. No, I thought there was the chance to do that if everything came together, but then it's impossible to shake it off entirely because of what I've said previously about how even when we're dominating derbies, you still have that wee sort of butterflies in the stomach, and you're never really fully confident. So I'm coming into this game carrying with me all the trauma of the Celtic in Europe stuff that we've discussed so many times, and all those teams that you could rhyme off. But this one did feel different because Brendan Rodgers was out there publicly saying it. So he's never felt more ready to enter the Champions League than now. The board have done their job. Fair enough, we have to agree with that, but based on the quality that was brought to the club in the dying days of the transfer window. And he felt like the squad was in a good place to go and deliver results. And, after that game, we go into some very tough games, but that doesn't matter just now. We can only talk about what has happened. And they delivered on the night, and it was a brilliant night, a brilliant performance against, albeit lesser, but legitimate Champions League opponents. We went out and absolutely destroyed them. And how often can we actually say that over the last however many years?
Part of that good Champions League preparation that we were talking about, and certain people, including the board, doing their job, was bringing in Champions League quality players. And Arne Engels comes in and he just slots right in. He just fit right in at that team. You get what you pay for. he looked. I was thinking about. I can't remember the last time a Celtic midfielder joined and just looked as if he kind of looks like, apart from Callum McGregor, he just fits there. He kind of knows exactly what to do. He looks like a senior, well-drilled member of the team already.
Yeah, I can only think of when Kyogo came in and he was just putting up front and he just seemed like he'd been there forever and he's just going to score goals for Celtic. This guy just looks like he's going to be a class player for Celtic, and not even just Celtic class, but he was brilliant in that game. And what I love about him is the dirty side of his game. He's not scared to do any of the dirty side. I think that's sort of what we've seen from the recruitment this summer is and January as well, is all the guys fit into what Brendan Rodgers was talking about, that power, that pace. But the word he's always using constantly is work. And that's why PALMA is going to be left behind, because he's probably not willing to do that. But that team out there were all willing to work, whether it be the forwards, whether it be the midfielders. Everybody worked and nobody worked harder than him. Covered every blade of grass. I thought his passing was crisp, his touch was great, and the technique on the penalty, you can just tell the guys, he's got it all for a midfielder. And I think it is that, hopefully, the Celtic board and recruitment team are looking at that and going, do you know what? Look at the players out in the pitch. Who are our best ones? And most of them are the guys that we've paid decent money for, or guys that are established players or very expensive players.
It's the expensive ones, isn't it? It's our best players are our most expensive. But Arne Engels, to me, Stephen, is just looks like, I mean, huge caveat here. We've still got the more difficult end of the Champions League games to play, and those are the tests. But for that game, he was brilliant.
Yeah, and with the difficult games on the way, there's 3 in a row that are coming up that are going to be very difficult. And we've also got Aston Villa. I think that's towards the end. That's the last game, of course. So he won't be able to carry the team on his own in that game. So it'd be difficult to judge him. Yeah, well, he might judge him by that. But what I would say is that it won't be through lack of confidence if he doesn't turn up in these games, because I'm very impressed with that. Anyone as a layman, anyone a nod in terms with what goes into like a scouting process will know that psychological profile goes into it, what kind of personality he is, and that must have been very, very impressive. A supremely confident boy. It looks as if he's taken to, as you say, just slotted straight in. He's already taking penalties. He's taking penalties at the very highest level that Celtic will play at in terms of just the Champions League. So I'm really impressed with what I've seen so far. I think where we left it last week was that I'd said that he looks competent at the very least. So he's come in and he doesn't look like he's going to take a long time to settle in, kind of like Bernardo did in that way. I don't think there's going to be any real adjustment period, and I really liked that. But since then, 2 games where he's just kind of taken it up a level. And I know he came on as a sub against FALKIRK, but when KUHN came on, it was a completely different game. Celtic were a completely different outfit at that point. So, it's early days. But my impressions of Engels are, I'm very, very impressed indeed. And I think we've got the next big star on our hands there.
Do you think there's anything in a 3-man midfield of Engels, Bernardo and McGregor? Bernardo seems to be the one that's dropping out for Engels, and then we're leaving the sort of, that wild card thing you were talking about earlier. We've got that in Hatate a wee bit. I mean, he was terrible against FALKIRK, but I thought he was good in the Champions League. Yeah. But equally, I think Bernardo, I've been really impressed with Bernardo recently.
I don't think there's going to be a sort of set midfield. I think McGregor will always play, and I think Engels is probably etching into that other position, and we can swap it about a bit. But we've got options now, and that's what you want as a team like this. Bernardo, when he's come in, has looked good. I thought in the Rangers game he was great. I thought when he played against FALKIRK, he was one of the only players in the first half that sort of stood out. And when he comes on, I think he always makes a difference. So again, it's that competition kills complacency, doesn't it? If Hatate has a bad game, he knows there's somebody there to take his place. And I think as we go through the Champions League, it's not going to be this set and forget team. I think Brendan Rodgers is quite adaptable, and he maybe think Engels, McGregor and Bernardo might be better for the tough away games or playing against the tougher teams. So we're going to see what happens here. But now I'm in this Champions League, I'm looking at the options you've just presented me and going, I don't really fear teams. We are going to get beat. We are going to take beatings. But if we go in and do what FALKIRK did when we go into games, we'll be all right. We'll go in and play our game and we'll give a good show on ourselves.
Now, I've issued an apology to NICOLAS KUHN. I did say there was another one coming up later on in the podcast. Martin MELLY, have you got anything you would like to say to Liam Scales? You can say it right into that camera there if you want.
I would like to apologise to absolutely nobody. What you were talking about, Engels, there is he's sort of at this level, he looks good, but we've got harder teams to come up against. And so I've criticised Liam Scales in the past. I don't think it was unwarranted, but that guy has come on leaps and bounds and now looks like a Celtic player, but not just a Celtic player, a good Celtic player. And it's going to be difficult for Trusty to get in the team ahead of him. And that's quite right. He got the goal, the first goal against Bratislava, but apart from that, his all-round game was brilliant. We know he can defend, but on the ball, he was much, much improved. And I think I'm at the point now where I'm looking at him and going, see if you go away to Dortmund or away to Atalanta and we let in a couple of goals, I'm not going to point the finger at you and go, see, you should be dropped, because that's not what it's about. In that game, in the games against Rangers, in every game this season, he's proved to me that he's more than good enough to be a Celtic player and a starting Celtic player. So I can't ask much more than that. He gives everything he's got. He's got a guy come in behind him in Trusty who everybody thinks is going to take his place, and he's putting up a fight where he's winning right now. And I genuinely can't ask any more of the guy. He's playing to the highest level in the Champions League. He's getting man of the match. I didn't think he was man of the match, but that doesn't matter. He scored a goal, but he defended brilliantly and he looked better than Cameron Carter-Vickers in the game. So for me, well done, mate. I don't want that to sound patronising, because it's not. He has completely turned around what I think about him, and he is going to be a Celtic player going forward.
That was powerful.
Aye,
that was powerful.
Very magnanimous. We should all really give ourselves pats.
God, we're all so brave.
Steve, is there anything you want to? You want to get off your
who have
chest?
I got to apologise to? The listening public.
Yeah.
For being a fraud. I can't remember. Have I come in away with anything wild recently?
No, recently. I don't think there's. I mean, you'll probably get one throughout the course of the season. You know what I mean?
It's in the post.
If Palma starts to turn it on,
there we go. I need to retract that.
Or you could apologise to all the listeners after you so strongly backed Greg Taylor last week. You can apologise on all our behalves.
Absolutely not. But yes, there was that horrible clearance that led to a goal.
Decent finish though. I mean, it's no Greggy's fault that he just hooks that right over his head directly into the danger area in a Champions League game.
It was bad. It was definitely bad on his weaker foot. He shouldn't have taken that decision. But
listen, it was a peachy goal.
It can happen. It wasn't ideal from Greg Taylor. But what I would say is there was a few on the night. Cameron Carter-Vickers was not good, to the point where possibly playing through some sort of knock. I know he was taken off, and I think
got an injection.
Yeah, so Brendan Rodgers had been talking about players being given extra recovery and all that in training. It's not necessarily that they're injured. Rubbish. Yeah, so utter woke nonsense.
Woke nonsense.
You're right. But no, Liam Scales, just to add to what you've said there, absolutely outstanding recently. And Trusty is going to have to be absolutely extraordinary to even get on the pitch, genuinely, because with the history of how Scales has grown into this team, and he's been gradually getting better and better. And you're allowed to say that you can appreciate his performances with still having reservations about going forward, and you want a different type of player. I think that's still a valid opinion, even if people disagree with it. But what you cannot say is Scales is a bad Celtic defender. No. It's not true. It's demonstrably untrue. He's playing very, very well, and he's performing for Celtic in big games. He's coming up with big performances against Rangers and in the Champions League, and those two things are the main things that we ask of Celtic players. So it's really remarkable, the turnaround. And I don't want.
Do you think he's doing differently? Do you think he's doing anything differently? It's part of me feels like he's focused his game more. He's maybe doing and trying less. Do you know what I mean? It's taken him a while. I mean, I'll come to it, but it's taken him a while maybe to realise what he's good at and what he's not so good at. He's like, see, if I just focus on these 10 things I'm really, really good at and eliminate what I'm not, I'll be a much better player for it. But that being said, I am really aware that in the Champions League last year, a journalist asked Liam Scales, you went from here to here, what have you done differently? And Liam Scales went, absolutely nothing. I've just been doing the whole thing, and the manager's now noticing what I'm doing. I don't know if I necessarily buy that, because it's not just this manager who has not picked Liam Scales. Every Celtic manager, more or less, since he's been here, has not picked Liam Scales. But that being said, do you feel there's been a change in his game? Do you feel he's tweaked anything?
Yeah, well, we spoke about this last week as well, and I could only really observe or kind of give my opinions based on what I have observed, rather. And it seems to be that his decision making is an awful lot better, and that will be a combination of many things, mainly experience in coaching and getting to play next to the best defender that we've seen for years at the club, decades maybe even, because he's been phenomenal
Greg
for
Taylor.
Yeah, yeah. And then he looks over at Diddy Basile on the other side of him, Cameron Carter-Vickers, and think, "Oh, I'm carrying you, son." But no, but Cameron Carter-Vickers, obviously, he's very, very good at making all the defenders that play beside him look better, and that's not to give him the credit for it. That's just Cameron Carter-Vickers provides the platform for defenders to be confident and express themselves a little better. That's not I don't like that they only look good because they're playing next to him, because that's not true either. He can't make them perform. He just gives them the confidence on which to perform right. So there's definitely that. And just managers showing faith in him.
Yeah.
I think that could be the case. And he obviously played a lot last season and wasn't flawless by any stretch of the imagination, but he's gotten better. And that's all we can really ask of a player, is that he buys into the ideas being given to him.
Brendan does, doesn't he? I mean, that's maybe we're now seeing. Well, I mean, not to take all the credit away for these guys, right? But maybe we're now seeing with the players we've discussed today, and KUHN and Scales, that it's Brendan. It's Brendan doing that thing that Brendan has been known to do in the past and improve players. Yeah,
he'll be making players better, but he spoke about it a lot, that Celtic play in a very structured way. Now, that doesn't mean it's rigid, but the players all know their job now. And last season, it was changing a lot around Scales. He would how many different partners. He even had Nat Phillips at one point beside him. If we can
and all that as well.
all remember that. This season, he's a Celtic player, and he's probably grown in confidence in that he maybe feels he belongs there now, and rightly so. But what I think it is he knows what the rest of the team's going to do, so he knows what his job is within that. And last season, a lot of the time I got annoyed with him because he'd make the easy pass instead of teams would leave him on the ball, and that would maybe make him panic and go, "Oh, they've left me on the ball. What am I going to do? But I'll just give it back to Carter-Vickers." Now, that's not an option, Brent, because he'll not play if he keeps doing that. So what he's got to do is be comfortable as a Celtic player, but get uncomfortable in doing things that are challenging for him, and that's taking the ball on and moving the ball on quickly and making those passes through that he wasn't making last season. And he's doing that. If you add that to his defending, then you kind of get the defender we've got now. So it's a bit of confidence in the team, but in his play as well.
Just one last point of order on the agenda here, if you've getting to say about it. Stephen Naismith sacked.
Broken up. Devastated,
gutted. Anyway, thank you so much for joining us on this week's episode of 20 Minute Tims. We'll be back next week. Support us on Patreon, or at the very least, subscribe to us on YouTube. Thank you so much for watching and listening.